My name is Alara, and I am 32 years old. From where I'm sitting now, in the sunlit quiet of my workshop, I can hear the gentle ticking of a dozen different clocks, each one a heartbeat. I've restored myself. It's a peaceful sound, the sound of order and precision, and for most of my life, it was the only peace I ever knew. I never imagined that a broken toy, a silent life-size silver automaton built for a long-dead queen, would become the key that unlocked not just a hidden treasure, but the entire secret truth of my life. I certainly never thought it would deliver the sweetest, quietest revenge against the family that raised me, but never for a single day saw me as one of their own. Their blindness became my greatest weapon. Before I tell you how a single, perfectly crafted gear changed my destiny forever, I'd love to know where you are all watching from today. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or invisible in your own home, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And for all the new viewers here, please consider subscribing to join this amazing community of people who understand that sometimes the quietest people have the most powerful stories to tell. The story begins not with my birth, but with my arrival. I was an infant, bundled in a coarse wool blanket, and delivered to the imposing stone steps of Beaumont Manor on a rain-slicked autumn night. I was an orphan, the only child of a man they said was a genius. My father had been a horologist, a master of clockwork and intricate mechanics, and a dear friend to the previous Lord Beaumont, the grandfather of the boy I would grow up alongside. My parents had died in a carriage accident, a sudden, brutal end to their lives, leaving me a ward of the Grand Beaumont estate. I was a responsibility, a charitable act, and from the very beginning, a ghost at their table. Lord Alistair Beaumont and his wife Lady Genevieve took me in, but they never truly let me in. Their love, their attention, their world orbited a single brilliant son, their son Julian. Julian was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and a casual disregard for anything that didn't immediately gratify him. While I was dressed in practical, often mended clothes, Julian was a peacock in miniature velvets and silks. While my world was one of quiet observation from the corners of rooms, his was the center stage, a constant performance of entitlement. He was the heir, the future of the Beaumont name, and I was the footnote in his story. The difference between us was never clearer than in the way we treated our possessions. Julian was given everything a boy could desire: handcrafted wooden soldiers, intricate model ships, expensive leather-bound books, and he broke them all. Toys were not for cherishing, they were for conquering, for a brief, violent burst of amusement before being discarded in a heap of splintered wood and torn pages. I, on the other hand, had nothing that was truly mine, except the things Julian no longer wanted. And so the broken pieces became my treasures. I learned to see not the ruin, but the potential. A snapped mast on a model ship was a puzzle to be solved with glue and thread. A crushed tin soldier was an opportunity to learn about metalwork, gently tapping its dented armor back into shape with a stolen tack hammer. My small hands, which were supposed to be learning needlepoint, instead learned the language of mechanisms, of levers and springs and gears. The disused stables at the far end of the garden became my secret kingdom, a place where I could breathe, a laboratory where the discarded remnants of Julian's carelessness were resurrected. I remember one year, for Julian's 8th birthday, he was gifted a music box from Switzerland. It was a masterpiece of polished rosewood, inlaid with mother of pearl. When you opened the lid, a tiny enameled ballerina would rise and spin to the crystalline notes of a minuet. It was enchanting, a perfect little world of beauty and order sealed within a box. Julian was captivated for all of 10 minutes. The following day, in a fit of pique over some trivial matter, he hurled it against the stone wall of the nursery. The beautiful music died with a sickening crunch. The nanny simply sighed and swept the larger pieces into a dustpan, destined for the rubbish heap. That night, long after the house had fallen silent, I crept downstairs. My heart hammered against my ribs as I retrieved the broken box from the waste bin in the scullery. I took it back to my small, stark room in the attic and laid the pieces out on my threadbare rug like a surgeon examining a patient. The wood was splintered, the ballerina's delicate leg was snapped, and worst of all, the intricate brass comb that played the notes was bent and mangled. For weeks I worked on it in secret. I read books on woodworking I found in the rarely used section of the library, learning how to steam and bend the splintered rosewood back into place. I used one of my own sewing needles and a candle flame to carefully fuse the ballerina's leg. The musical comb was the greatest challenge. I spent hours gently, painstakingly, straightening each individual metal tooth with a pair of tweezers until the melody, when plucked by hand, was pure again. The day I finished, a wave of pride washed over me that was so warm and bright it felt like sunshine in my cold little room. I opened the lid, and the tiny ballerina rose, a little scarred but whole, and spun flawlessly to the clear, perfect music. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever created. My triumph, however, was short-lived. Lady Beaumont entered my room without knocking, her face a mask of stern disapproval. She had been looking for a misplaced brooch. Her eyes landed on the music box in my hands. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice sharp as broken glass. I tried to explain. "I found it. It was broken, so I—" "You stole it," she cut me off, her eyes narrowing. "You stole Julian's birthday gift. After all we have done for you, given you a home, a roof over your head, this is how you repay us? With theft and lies?" Tears welled in my eyes. "No, I didn't steal it. Julian threw it away. He broke it. I just fixed it." She snatched the box from my hands, her fingers leaving smudges on the polished wood. She glanced at Julian, who had appeared in the doorway behind her, a smirk playing on his lips. He had heard everything. He knew I was telling the truth. I looked at him, pleading with my eyes for him to speak up, to say something, anything. He just shrugged, a small dismissive gesture that sealed my fate. He enjoyed watching me squirm. "Lies on top of lies," Lady Beaumont declared. "You will have no dinner for 3 nights, and you will spend your afternoons polishing the silver in the dining hall until I can be assured this wicked streak has passed." She never gave the music box back to Julian. I think on some level, she knew its perfect condition belied her accusation. Instead, it disappeared, probably locked away in a drawer somewhere, a testament to an injustice I was powerless to fight. It was a harsh lesson, but a vital one. It taught me that in Beaumont Manor, the truth was secondary to the narrative, and the narrative was always, always in Julian's favor. My skills were not a gift. They were a threat, a source of suspicion. So I learned to hide them, to practice my craft deeper in the shadows of the stables, where no one could see and no one could punish me for it. As we grew older, the dynamic only solidified. Julian's carelessness morphed into a swaggering arrogance. He was handsome, charming to outsiders, and utterly hollow within. He excelled at things that came easily, riding, fencing, spending his father's money, and disdained anything that required patience or genuine effort. I, meanwhile, continued my secret education. My workshop in the stables grew more sophisticated. I built a small forge from scavenged bricks and a broken bellows. I learned to draft technical drawings, to calculate gear ratios, to temper steel. I became a ghost in the machine of the manor, the unseen hand that kept things running. When the great ancient grandfather clock in the main hall fell silent, its deep, resonant chime conspicuously absent from the rhythm of the house, Lord Beaumont was beside himself. He called in 3 different horologists from the city, each more expensive than the last. They all shook their heads, muttering about irreplaceable parts and exorbitant fees to rebuild the entire movement from scratch. The clock, they declared, was a museum piece now, beautiful but mute. I couldn't stand the silence. That clock had been a companion to me. Its steady, predictable rhythm was a comfort in a house where my own life felt so precarious. For 2 nights, after everyone was asleep, I snuck into the hall with a lantern and my tools. I studied the clock's massive inner workings, a cathedral of brass and steel. I had pored over diagrams of similar clocks in books from the 17th century. On the third night, I found it, the escapement pallet, a tiny anchor-shaped piece that regulates the swing of the pendulum, was worn down to a nub on one side, its delicate edge eroded by centuries of infinitesimal taps. It took me a week of secret, painstaking work in my stable forge to craft a replacement. I had to create my own specialized files from old bits of steel just to shape the hardened brass correctly. The tolerances were microscopic. On the final night, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement, I fitted the new pallet into place. I gave the pendulum a gentle push. It began to swing, and then I heard it, the most beautiful sound in the world. Tick, tock, it was alive. The next morning, the entire household was awakened by the deep booming chime of the clock striking 7. Lord Beaumont was ecstatic. He strode into the dining room for breakfast, preening like a showbird. Extraordinary, he announced to his wife and a thoroughly unimpressed Julian. I was looking at the mechanism yesterday, just pondering the issue, and I had a moment of insight. A simple adjustment was all it was. It seems these so-called experts lack a gentleman's intuition. I was serving the tea, as I often did when guests were not present. I stood there, invisible, holding the heavy silver pot, listening to him take credit for my work, for my nights of study, and my skinned knuckles, and my burning focus. He didn't even glance in my direction. The lie was so effortless, so complete. Julian snorted into his teacup. "Well done, Father. Perhaps you can fix my pocket watch next. It seems to have stopped." He tossed the gold watch onto the table, where it skittered to a stop. He didn't care if it worked. He just enjoyed the casual display of his wealth and his father's ignorance. I looked at the intricate watch, my fingers itching to open it, to find its silent heart and coax it back to life. But I said nothing. I just poured the tea, my face a carefully constructed mask of servitude, while inside, a quiet, cold anger began to harden into something that felt dangerously like resolve. My only true ally in that house was a man who, like me, was more comfortable with the earth and with tangible things than with the shifting currents of the Beaumont's affections. Mr. Davis was the head groundskeeper, a man whose skin was the color of weathered oak and whose hands, though gnarled with age, were surprisingly gentle. He had known my father, he'd worked at the manor since he was a boy, and remembered the brilliant, kind clockmaker who would visit the old lord. Sometimes, when I was in my workshop, he would appear at the door, holding a broken pair of shears or a malfunctioning water pump. "Reckon you could take a look at this, Alara?" he'd ask, his voice a low rumble. "Seems to have lost its spirit." He never questioned how I knew what I knew. He never acted surprised by my skill. He just accepted it, and in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift anyone in that house ever did: validation. He would watch me work, his pale blue eyes full of a quiet understanding. "Your father was the same," he told me once, as I was reseating the blade on a pruning saw. He could listen to a machine and know what was wrong with it just by the sound it made. Said they all had their own language, a gift, that is, a real gift. He was the one who kept my secret. He was the one who told me stories of my father's laughter, of his boundless curiosity, of the way he could make the most complex ideas seem simple. Through Mr. Davies, I came to know the man I had never met, and I began to understand that my fascination with mechanics was not a strange quirk, but a legacy. It was the one thing they couldn't take from me because they didn't even know I had it. It was my inheritance, hidden in plain sight. The final door to any life beyond the manor walls was slammed shut the year I turned 17. My schoolmaster, a kind, scholarly man named Mr. Howell, had taken a special interest in me. He saw past my quiet demeanor and recognized the sharpness of my mind. He was astonished by my grasp of physics and mathematics, concepts I had devoured on my own from textbooks Julian had been assigned, but never opened. Unbeknownst to me, he had sent an application on my behalf to the Royal Academy of Mechanical Arts in the capital, a place I had only ever read about in pamphlets, a gilded world of learning and innovation that felt as distant as the moon. To his shock and my own, I was granted an interview. They were offering a full scholarship for a student of singular practical aptitude. It was a lifeline, a chance to escape, to become someone, to have my name mean something other than the ward. I was dizzy with hope. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream of a future where my skills were not a secret to be hidden, but a talent to be celebrated. I made the mistake of sharing my news with Lady Beaumont. I found her in the drawing room, arranging flowers in a vase with a look of intense concentration. I explained about the letter, the interview, the scholarship, my voice trembling with a nervous energy I couldn't contain. She didn't look at me. She snipped the head off a white rose with a vicious little snap of her shears. And who, may I ask, would accompany you to the city? Who would pay for your travel? Who gave you permission to even consider such a thing? Mr. Howells said the school would cover the travel, I stammered. He said it's the chance of a lifetime. Finally, she turned to look at me, her eyes cold and hard as river stones. Your lifetime is here, Alara. Your place is here, to be useful. We have provided you with everything you need. This foolish ambition is unseemly for a girl in your position. You will write to this academy and inform them you are no longer interested. But there will be no more discussion on the matter, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone that signaled the end of the conversation. You are a ward of this house. You will show the proper gratitude. Later that evening, Julian found me in the library, where I had fled to hide my tears among the silent, dusty books. He had the letter from the academy in his hand. He must have taken it from my room. He waved it mockingly in my face. The Royal Academy? Really, Elara? Did you think they'd let a little grease-stained orphan like you in? You should know your place by now. You fix things. That's all you're good for. He crumpled the letter into a ball and tossed it into the cold fireplace. Don't worry, he said with a cruel grin. Mother is right. You're much more useful here. My riding boots need polishing. That was the day the last of my youthful hope died. I realized then that they didn't just see me as lesser. They needed me to be lesser. My success would somehow diminish their own. My ambition was an indictment of their charity. From that day on, I stopped dreaming of escape. I retreated even further into my world of metal and mechanics. If I was only useful for fixing things, then I would become the best fixer they had ever seen. My workshop became my world, my tools, my only friends. And I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I learned the patience of a clockmaker, the understanding that every gear turns in its own time, and that eventually everything comes full circle. Lord Alistair Beaumont's passing was as quiet and unremarkable as much of his life had been. He faded slowly, a man worn down by decades of country squire routine, and the gentle, persistent pressure of maintaining a legacy he hadn't truly earned, but had fiercely protected. The funeral was a grand affair, of course, filled with people who hadn't seen him in years, all murmuring the appropriate platitudes over glasses of sherry. Julian, draped in impeccably tailored black, played the part of the grieving son with theatrical solemnity. Lady Genevieve, a fragile porcelain doll of a widow, clung to his arm, her sorrow seeming genuine, if only for the loss of her station as the lady of the house. I stood at the back, a gray shadow against the dark wood of the chapel, my grief a complicated, hollow thing. I was mourning the father I never had, not the man who had ignored my existence for over 20 years. A week later, we were all gathered in the main drawing room for the reading of the will. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old paper. Julian sat in his father's favorite wingback chair by the fire, an air of impatient ownership already settling upon him. He was now Lord Beaumont, a title he wore like a new coat, still stiff and unfamiliar. Mr. Finch, the family solicitor, was a man who seemed to be made entirely of parchment and dust. He had served the Beaumonts for 50 years, and his loyalty was to the estate itself, a living entity of stone and land and history. He cleared his throat and began to read in a dry, rustling voice. It was exactly as everyone expected. The title, the manor, the lands, the investments, the entirety of the Beaumont fortune was bequeathed to my one and only son, Julian. Lady Genevieve was granted a generous widow's pension and the right to reside in the dower house for the remainder of her days. And then my name was mentioned. To our ward, Ilara, I grant continued residence and board at Beaumont Manor, to be provided at the sole discretion of the new lord, in recognition of her years of service to this family. Service, not as a daughter, not even as a foster child, as a servant. The words hung in the air, a public branding. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but it was duller now, worn smooth by years of practice. Julian shot me a look of triumphant condescension. I was now officially his dependent, living in his house on his charity. My existence here was no longer a right, but a privilege he could revoke at any moment. Mr. Finch paused, shuffling his papers. "There is one final item," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "A separate bequest, outside the main entail of the estate. It is from a much older Beaumont ancestor, Queen Annalise, from the late 17th century." He produced a smaller, yellow document, its wax seal cracked with age. "It concerns the automaton known as the Silver Swan." A flicker of interest crossed Julian's face. He knew the stories, of course. We all did. The Silver Swan was a family legend, a life-size clockwork creation of breathtaking beauty, crafted for the Queen by a master artisan. It was said to be the most complex automaton ever built, but it had not worked in over 200 years. It was stored somewhere in the labyrinthine attics, a forgotten relic. The bequest is accompanied by a sealed letter from the Queen herself, Mr. Finch continued, carefully handing a small brittle envelope to Julian. Julian broke the seal with a careless flick of his thumb, his expression one of amused curiosity. He unrolled the single sheet of parchment and began to read aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. "To the heir of Beaumont, who finds this missive," he read, "know that the Silver Swan is more than mere artifice. Within its silver heart, I have concealed the truest treasure of our line. It is a prize not for the hand that is strongest, but for the one with the heart to see its hidden beauty and the hands to heal its silent voice. Let skill be your key, and empathy your guide." Julian finished and let out a short, barking laugh. "The truest treasure of our line? Sounds like she hid the crown jewels in there. What do you suppose it is, Mother? A diamond necklace? A sack of gold sovereigns?" Lady Genevieve's eyes lit up with a familiar, greedy sparkle. "Annalise was known for her magnificent pearls," she whispered, already spending the fortune in her mind. "Well, let's not keep it waiting," Julian declared, standing up abruptly. "Let's go find this mechanical piggy bank and smash it open." Mr. Finch looked alarmed. "My lord, it is a priceless artifact, the craftsmanship alone. It's a broken toy." Julian sneered. "And it's mine now. Its only value is what's inside it." He led the way to the attics, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I followed, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. The attic was a graveyard of forgotten things, draped in shrouds of dust and spider webs. In the very center of the largest room, under a grimy skylight, it stood, the Silver Swan. Even covered in a thick layer of gray dust, it was magnificent. It was poised on a nest of silver reeds, its head bowed, its wings slightly unfurled. Every feather was individually wrought from silver, so fine and detailed they looked real. Its eyes were sapphires, dull under the grime, but still hinting at a deep, brilliant blue. It was a masterpiece of art and engineering, frozen in time. It was beautiful, and it was broken, and my heart ached for it. Julian circled it like a vulture. Right, where's the seam? He ran his hands over its smooth body, looking for a catch or a keyhole. Finding none, his frustration mounted. He picked up a rusty iron poker from a nearby fireplace. We'll make our own door. He wedged the tip of the poker under the edge of one of the swan's delicate wings and leaned on it with all his weight. A horrifying screech of protesting metal echoed through the silent attic. A long, ugly scratch appeared on the polished silver. Stop. The word escaped my lips before I could think, louder than I intended. Julian turned, his face flushed with exertion and annoyance. What did you say? You'll destroy it, I said, my voice steadier now. It's not a chest, Julian. It's a machine, a very complex, delicate machine. You can't just force it open. You have to understand it. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. And I suppose you understand it. The little orphan mechanic? Don't be ridiculous, Alara. Let me try, I pleaded, stepping forward into the beam of dusty light. Let me have a look at it. I can open it. I know I can, without breaking it. Lady Genevieve scoffed from the doorway. Don't be absurd, child. What would you know of such things? Stand aside and let Julian handle his property. But Mr. Finch, who had followed us up, was looking at me with a new, speculative expression. He was a man who valued history and precedent above all else. The sight of Julian's brute force attacking a priceless heirloom clearly disturbed him. Perhaps we should consider the girl's request, my lord, the solicitor said, his voice cautious but firm. The Queen's note did mention hands to heal and skill as the key. Brute force seems to be the very antithesis of her instructions. If the treasure is indeed valuable, the automaton itself is surely part of that value. To destroy it would be... Julian hesitated, the poker still in his hand. He was driven by greed, and the lawyer's argument about value had hit its mark. He looked from the scratched swan to my determined face, and a slow, malicious smile spread across his lips. He saw an opportunity, not just for treasure, but for entertainment at my expense. Very well, he said, tossing the poker onto a pile of old furniture with a loud clatter. You can have your chance to play with the pretty bird, Alara. We'll make a little wager of it. I'll give you 1 week, 7 days. If you can open it by then, I'll admit you're good for something other than polishing silver. The insult was as reflexive to him as breathing. But when you fail, and you will fail, you will spend the next month cataloging every dusty book in that library, by hand, and you won't get to touch another tool for a year. Do we have a deal? It was a cruel, impossible bargain, designed to humiliate me. Failure was the expected, the desired outcome, but as I looked at the wounded silver swan, at the deep gash in its perfect wing, I felt a surge of protective fury. This magnificent creation deserved a better fate than to be shattered by a greedy fool. It was speaking to me in the silent language of broken things, and I knew I was the only one who could understand it. Deal, I said, my voice clear and steady. The air in the attic seemed to crackle with the word. Julian's smile widened. He thought he had won. He had no idea he had just handed me the key to my own cage. Getting the silver swan down from the attic and into my workshop was a monumental task. It was heavier than it looked, a dense mass of silver, brass, and steel. It took 4 men, guided by Mr. Davies and my precise instructions, to maneuver it down the narrow stairs and across the courtyard to the stables. Julian watched the proceedings from an upstairs window, a smirk on his face, as if observing a fool's errand. Lady Genevieve had already dismissed the entire affair as a waste of time. Their dismissal was a gift. It meant they would leave me alone. My workshop had never housed anything so grand. The swan stood in the center of the floor, dwarfing my workbenches and my small forge. It looked like a fallen queen in a peasant's hovel. For the first 2 days, I did nothing but look. I cleaned it, inch by painstaking inch, with soft cloths and a special polish I mixed myself. As the centuries of grime fell away, the true artistry was revealed. The engraving on the feathers was so fine it was barely visible. The delicate curve of its neck was perfection. The sapphire eyes seemed to watch me, full of a deep, ancient intelligence. I ran my hands over the ugly scratch Julian had made, my fingers tracing the jagged furrow in the smooth silver. It felt like a wound on a living creature. I spent hours just sitting with it, my sketchbook in my lap, drawing it from every angle, mapping its external structure. I used a set of dental mirrors and a bright lantern to peer through the tiny crevices between the silver plates of its body. What I saw inside was a universe of complexity. It was a forest of gears, levers, cams, and springs, packed together with a density and precision that took my breath away. It was far more advanced than the grandfather clock, more intricate than any pocket watch. It was the work of a genius, a master at the absolute peak of his craft. By the third day, I had a working hypothesis. This wasn't a simple broken mechanism. The damage from Julian's poker was superficial. The core problem was deeper. The entire system was seized, locked up by more than just age. Certain key gear trains were deliberately, ingeniously misaligned. It wasn't broken. It was locked. It was a puzzle box, a combination lock of staggering complexity, disguised as an automaton. Queen Annalise's note started to make sense. Skill wasn't just about repair. It was about decryption. I began the real work. The 7-day deadline loomed over me, a constant pressure. I moved a small cot into the workshop, sleeping in short, dreamless bursts, never wanting to be far from the swan. The world outside faded away. There was only the smell of oil and metal, the feel of my tools in my hand, and the immense silent presence of the silver bird. Mr. Davis was my silent guardian. He would appear at the door 3 times a day with a tray of food and a pot of hot tea, which I would often forget to eat. He never asked how it was going. He would just nod, a look of quiet faith in his eyes, and leave me to my work. His belief in me was a steady flame in the exhausting darkness. Julian, of course, could not resist the urge to gloat. He and his mother made daily visits, their footsteps loud and intrusive in the quiet of my sanctuary. "Still tinkering with your toy, Alara?" he'd call out, leaning against the doorframe, the very picture of idle arrogance. "I've been picking out a particularly dusty set of encyclopedias for you to start on. You'll love it." Lady Genevieve would peer in, her nose wrinkled in distaste at the sight of my workshop. "Such a mess, dear. I do hope you air the place out when this nonsense is over. The smell of grease is so common." Their taunts were meant to break my focus, to remind me of my place, but they had the opposite effect. Every condescending word was like a drop of fuel on the fire of my determination. I would hear their voices, and my hands would become steadier, my focus sharper. I would not fail. I would not give them the satisfaction. By the evening of the 6th day, I was exhausted, frustrated, and no closer to a solution. I had managed to clean and lubricate many of the external gears, but the central mechanism remained stubbornly locked. I sat on my stool, staring at the intricate gears, my mind a fog of fatigue. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a girl, playing with things I didn't understand. I rested my head against the swan's cool silver body, my eyes closing. And then I felt it, a tiny, almost imperceptible irregularity on the surface of the main driving gear, a massive brass wheel deep within the bird's chest. It wasn't a flaw. It was too precise. My fingers, sensitive from years of handling tiny, delicate parts, traced its outline. My heart began to pound. I grabbed my smallest magnifying glass and my brightest lantern. There, hidden in the intricate scrollwork, etched onto the gear's surface was a minuscule maker's mark. It was the stylized signature of the artisan, but it wasn't just a signature. One of the flourishes on the letter M was a separate piece of metal, a tiny, almost invisible lever, no bigger than an eyelash. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, chasing away the fatigue. It was a switch, a hidden control. I used the tip of a fine needle to gently, carefully press it. I felt a soft click, and a section of the gear train shifted, disengaging from the main drive. It hadn't unlocked the automaton, but it had changed the puzzle. A new set of smaller gears were now accessible. I realized with dawning wonder that this was not a single lock, but a sequence, a series of hidden releases that had to be triggered in the correct order. But what was the order? It couldn't be random. The artisan who built this was a genius, not a gambler. I thought back to the Queen's note. The heart to see its hidden beauty, the hands to heal its silent voice. A silent voice, music. I remembered reading in a history book from the library that Queen Annalise was an amateur composer, known for a simple lullaby she had written for her younger sister. It was her favorite melody. Could it be? I scrambled to my feet and ran to the manor, straight to the music room. I fumbled through the stacks of sheet music until I found it, a slim, leather-bound book titled Compositions of Queen Annalise. And there it was, Annalise's lullaby. It was a simple 8-note melody. I memorized it, the sequence of notes burning itself into my brain. I raced back to the workshop. The newly revealed gears were of different sizes, and when turned, they clicked into a series of distinct positions. 8 positions. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my tools. This was it. I had to translate the musical notes into a mechanical sequence. A higher note must correspond to a faster gear ratio, a lower note to a slower one. I worked through the night. The only sounds, the frantic scratching of my pen on paper as I calculated the ratios, and the soft, precise clicks as I used a long, custom-made tool to engage each gear, setting it to the correct position, one by one, following the melody of the lullaby. C, G, G, A, G, E, F, C, E, F, C. The final gear clicked into place, just as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the grimy workshop window. For a moment, nothing happened. A heavy, profound silence filled the room. My heart sank. I had failed. It was over. I felt the burn of tears behind my eyes, the bitter taste of defeat. And then I heard it, a soft whirring sound, deep from within the swan's chest. It was the sound of 1,000 perfectly meshed gears, beginning to turn in unison for the first time in 2 centuries. A low click echoed in the quiet room, then another, slowly, with an impossible silent grace. The silver swan lifted its head. The sapphire eyes seemed to clear, catching the morning light and flashing with a brilliant, startling blue. Its long, elegant neck curved, and its silver wings, the one Julian had scarred and the one that was still perfect, began to unfold. It moved with a fluidity that was utterly lifelike, a ghost of motion reawakened. A section of the swan's breast, a piece that had been utterly seamless, began to retract. A perfectly square opening appeared, revealing a small compartment lined with faded black velvet. There were no jewels, no gold, no magnificent pearls. There was only a single rolled-up parchment, yellowed with age, tied with a faded purple ribbon, bearing the royal seal of Queen Annalise. I reached out a trembling hand and took it. It was light as a feather, but it felt as heavy as my entire life. I had sent a message with Mr. Davies for Mr. Finch to be present at 10 o'clock that morning, the precise hour of my deadline. Julian and Lady Genevieve arrived with him, their faces smug, fully expecting to witness my public humiliation. Julian was carrying a small, leather-bound book and a quill, ready to dictate my cataloging punishment. They stopped dead in the doorway. The scene that greeted them was not what they expected. The silver swan was no longer a dusty, inert statue. It stood in the center of the room, alive with light and motion, its head held high, its wings partially extended in a posture of serene elegance. And I was standing beside it, holding the ancient parchment in my hands. "What is this?" Julian sputtered, his eyes wide with disbelief. You opened it." "She did," Mr. Finch said, his voice hushed with awe as he stared at the automaton. He was looking at me now, with an expression I had never seen before, one of genuine, unadulterated respect. "Well, where is it?" Lady Genevieve demanded, pushing past her son. "Where is the treasure? What's in the box?" Her eyes darted around the small compartment, her face falling as she saw it was empty. "There's nothing there. All that for nothing." "There is this," I said, holding up the scroll. My voice didn't shake. Julian scoffed. "A piece of paper? That's the truest treasure? Don't be ridiculous. It's probably a poem. Let me see." He snatched the parchment from my hand. He unrolled it, his eyes scanning the elegant, spidery script. His smug expression began to melt, replaced by a look of confusion, then dawning horror. The color drained from his face. This can't be right," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. "It's nonsense." He thrust the document at Mr. Finch. The old lawyer took it, adjusted his spectacles, and began to read. The silence in the workshop stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint, rhythmic whirring from within the swan. Mr. Finch read the document once, then a second time, his eyebrows climbing higher and higher up his wrinkled forehead. Finally, he looked up, his gaze moving from the parchment to my face. His expression was one of profound shock. "My dear girl," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "this is not a poem. This is a royal decree. It is a legally executed deed of title and adoption, signed and sealed by Queen Annalise herself." Lady Genevieve gave a sharp, nervous laugh. "Adoption? What are you talking about, Finch? The Queen was childless." "So the histories have always told us," Mr. Finch replied, his eyes never leaving mine. "But this document states otherwise. It seems the Queen, unable to bear children and deeply distrustful of her nephew, Julian's direct ancestor, for his profligate and cruel nature, secretly adopted a child. The daughter of her most trusted confidante and royal artisan, the very man who created this automaton." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped away beneath me. My father, he had never been just a friend to the old lord. He was descended from the Queen's artisan. "The decree," Mr. Finch continued, his voice gaining strength and authority, "legally and irrevocably transfers the original title of nobility and all unentailed lands and properties, which includes this manor and the surrounding 5,000 acres, to her adopted daughter and her direct descendants. The Queen hid it here in the Swan, creating a test that only someone with the artisan's bloodline, someone with the innate hands to heal, could possibly solve. It was a lock that could only be opened by her true heir." He took a deep breath and looked directly at me. "The document names the artisan's family. It traces the lineage. Elara, you are the last living descendant of Queen Annalise's adopted daughter. You are her sole true heir." The world stopped. The air left my lungs in a rush. Julian stared at me, his mouth hanging open, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. "No, it's a lie, a forgery, a trick," he roared, lunging for the document. Mr. Finch held it away from him. "The royal seal is genuine and unbroken, my lord. The parchment, the ink, it is all consistent with the period. This document is legally binding. The Beaumonts, descended from the nephew, were never the true owners. They were merely stewards, caretakers." The old lawyer turned to me, and for the first time in my life, someone in this house looked at me and saw not a ward, not a servant, but someone of consequence. He bowed his head. a gesture of deep, formal respect. "My lady," he said. The two words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Julian let out a choked, strangled sound. Lady Genevieve swayed on her feet, her hand flying to her chest as if to keep her heart from bursting out. The entire foundation of their world, the bedrock of their identity, had been pulverized into dust in the space of 5 minutes. They were not the masters of this house. They were guests. They had been living in my house their entire lives. I looked away from their shattered faces to the silver swan. It stood serene and beautiful, its purpose finally fulfilled. My ancestor had built it, a mechanical marvel of breathtaking genius. And my other ancestor, a queen, had turned it into a vessel of hope, a message in a bottle sent across the centuries, waiting for the right hands to find it. My talent, the thing they had dismissed and mocked, was not a hobby. It was my birthright. It was the key that had unlocked my past and secured my future. In the sudden, ringing silence of the workshop, I finally understood. I wasn't a ghost in their house. They were ghosts in mine. The calm that settled over me was absolute. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even triumphant. I was, for the first time in my life, free. The immediate aftermath was a tempest of denial and fury. Julian raved, calling me a charlatan, a witch, accusing me and Mr. Finch of conspiring against him. He threatened lawsuits. He threatened to have me thrown out onto the street. His words a desperate, flailing attempt to claw back the power that had evaporated before his eyes. But his threats were hollow. Mr. Finch was unmovable. He was a creature of the law, and the law, in this case, was irrefutable. The Queen's decree was a legal instrument of formidable power, and it superseded any subsequent wills or claims. Lady Genevieve, after her initial shock, collapsed into a state of silent porcelain fragility. She retreated to her rooms, refusing to see anyone, the sudden violent demolition of her social standing too much to bear. The transfer of power was not a dramatic battle, but a quiet, inexorable tide. The staff who had witnessed my life of quiet servitude and Julian's years of casual cruelty shifted their allegiance with a speed that was both startling and deeply satisfying. Their my lords and my ladies began to find their proper targets. My first official act as the lady of the manor was to have the ugly scratch on the swan's wing professionally and painstakingly repaired by the finest silversmith in the country. It was a symbolic act. The wound inflicted by carelessness would be healed by craftsmanship. My first conversation with Julian, as the true head of the house, took place a week later in the Grand Library, the very room he had sentenced me to catalog as a punishment. He was slumped in a chair, sullen and defeated. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a venomous resentment. "What do you want?" he muttered, not looking at me. I stood before him, not feeling like a conqueror, but simply like myself. "We need to discuss your future, Julian, and your mother's." He looked up at that, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "My future? This is my home." "This was your home," I corrected him, my voice gentle but firm. "It is now my home, but I am not without compassion. I will not turn you out. You and your mother may continue to live here." A look of relief washed over his face, quickly followed by suspicion. "What's the catch?" "There is no catch," I said, "but there are new rules. The estate will no longer fund your trips to the city, your gambling debts, or your tailor. The days of idle leisure are over. This house, this land, it is a working estate, and everyone who lives here will contribute. I will give you a generous allowance to start, enough to find proper work in a field that suits you. Your mother will have her dower house, as your father's will intended. It is more than fair." He stared at me, as if I had suggested he fly to the moon. "Work," he scoffed. "A Beaumont does not work. And what would you know of fairness, you little usurper?" "I know more than you think," I replied, my gaze steady. "I have been working my entire life, Julian. While you were learning to ride, I was learning to forge. While you were at dances, I was studying schematics. I know the value of a day's labor. It is a lesson you are long overdue to learn." He had no response. The truth of my words was unassailable. For the rest of his time at the manor, he was a thundercloud of resentment, watching as I took the reins of the estate with a competence that infuriated him. I met with the tenant farmers, discussing crop rotation and soil health. I reviewed the account books with Mr. Finch, finding and eliminating decades of wasteful spending. I began to draw up plans for a future he could never have imagined. He saw me not as his sister, not as his equal, but as his replacement, and he could not bear it. 1 year later, Beaumont Manor was unrecognizable. The stuffy, silent atmosphere of a museum had been replaced by a hum of creativity and purpose. The old disused stables, my former sanctuary, had been transformed. Using a portion of the estate's considerable income, I had converted them into a state-of-the-art school and workshop, the Beaumont Academy of Horology and Mechanical Arts. I had sought out promising young apprentices from all walks of life, boys and girls with clever hands and curious minds, who, like me, might otherwise never have had a chance to nurture their talents. The Great Hall, once a place of stiff formality, now displayed my students' finest work, alongside the ancient treasures of the manor. And in the center, on a raised dais, stood the Silver Swan. Fully restored, it performed its elegant, lifelike dance every hour on the hour, a constant, beautiful reminder of the power of skill and the secrets of the past. It was no longer a legend, it was an inspiration. Lady Genevieve eventually emerged from her seclusion. The loss of her status had, paradoxically, liberated her. Without the constant pressure to maintain appearances, she softened. She took up gardening, finding a quiet joy in the soil that she had never found in the drawing room. Our relationship became one of polite, distant cordiality. We would never be close, but the bitterness had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance of the new reality. She was a tenant in my house, and she seemed, in a strange way, more at peace than she had ever been as its mistress. Julian did not adapt. The idea of earning his own living was an insult he could not swallow. After a few months of watching me thrive, of being a guest in the rooms he once owned, he took the allowance I offered and left for the city, vowing to make his own fortune and show me what a true Beaumont was made of. The reports I received from Mr. Finch were sporadic and sad. Julian drifted from one failed business venture to another, his arrogance and laziness preventing him from succeeding at anything. He burned through his allowance and was last seen working as a low-level clerk, his fine clothes fraying at the cuffs, his face permanently etched with the sour look of a man who believes the world has wronged him. I felt a pang of pity for him, but it was a distant, detached feeling. His life was the result of his own choices, his character the architect of his own ruin. I had found my true purpose, not in a title, but in my work. My family was not the one I had been born to, but the one I was building. My students, with their bright, eager faces, Mr. Davies, who now proudly served as the curator of the manor's growing collection of mechanical wonders, and Mr. Finch, my loyal and trusted advisor. I was Lady Ilara of Beaumont Manor, but more importantly, I was a master craftswoman, a teacher, an innovator. My name, once a synonym for orphan and ward, was now synonymous with excellence. Looking back, I see that the years I spent in the shadows were not a punishment. They were a preparation. The neglect that had hurt me so deeply had also given me the freedom to become myself. The invisibility I had railed against had been my shield, allowing my skills to grow in secret, unshaped by the expectations of others. Julian's carelessness taught me to value precision. Lady Genevieve's coldness taught me to find warmth in my own accomplishments. They had meant to keep me in my place, but they had inadvertently forged the very tools I would use to build my own kingdom. The truest treasure hidden in the Swan was never a jewel or a title. It was the realization that my worth was not something they could grant or withhold. It was something I had held in my own two hands all along. The greatest lesson I learned from all of this is that your value is not determined by those who refuse to see it. It is inherent. It is in your talents, your passions, your resilience. Sometimes, the very people who underestimate you the most are the ones who are creating the conditions for your greatest triumph. They are so focused on keeping you down that they never see you building the ladder you will use to climb right over them. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated in your life, only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below, because every single one of those stories deserves to be celebrated. This community is built on sharing our journeys, and your experience could be the inspiration someone else needs to see today. And please don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about turning life's hardest lessons into its greatest victories. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Remember that family is defined by love and respect, not just by blood, and that your true worth is something you build yourself, one gear at a time. I wish you all strength and clarity on your own paths. Thank you for listening.